Hi, I'm Tim Erblick. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Ethisphere Institute, and I'm delighted to be here with Brad Smith, who's President and Chief Legal Officer of Microsoft. So perhaps, Brad, could we just start and tell me just a little bit more about what you do here at Microsoft?
Sure. Well, first, welcome to Microsoft. And I'm really lucky, I think, to work here every day. I head the part of the company that we call Corporate External and Legal Affairs. And as the name suggests, it's responsible for a number of the corporate processes and groups, including compliance and ethics. It's responsible for our external engagement with really a very wide array of stakeholders, including those who engage on CSR types of issues. It also has the legal function. And we work on a number of very specific issues that connect to Microsoft's broader societal responsibilities: sustainability, accessibility, security, privacy, digital inclusion. There's never a dull moment.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I travel quite a lot, and one of the things that I do is just follow people that I think I can learn from. And Brad, I have to tell you, you're a busy man. I saw your foreword to the book today, and yesterday, or 2 days ago, I saw you on CNBC talking about measuring diversity and inclusion. So it's really an interesting time. And that brings me to the starting point of one of the things I'm super curious about. So what we've seen over the last several years is there's situations such as yourself, Microsoft, and you weigh in on really pressing and important societal issues. So, for example, you came out very strongly about DACA, and you've been a leader on diversity and inclusion for a long time, and immigration and so on and so forth, and perhaps not a natural place for corporations to have such a loud and powerful voice. What makes you do this? What's the driver behind this?
I think we live in a fascinating time. There is more hunger, I think hunger is the right word, for companies to address broad issues. I think it naturally and rightly, it is mostly focused on the connection between companies and the issues they touch because of the products that they create, the services they provide, or the needs of their employees. But a decade ago, we would have been much quieter. And yet what we're seeing in the marketplace from the public and from our employees is frankly a desire to see companies address societal challenges more broadly and boldly than before.
Yeah, and we see that a lot. So what we do at Ethisphere, I think you know, we try to set the standard for corporate behavior. 3 or 4 years ago, we started doing things like testing for human rights in the supply chain. And Microsoft operates in how many countries?
Well, we have subsidiaries in 120 countries. We do business in about 190.
So when you think about the rule of law and how Microsoft operates around the globe, you know, in a sense of fair play and a sense of decency, how does this really connect to values-based leadership?
Well, the first question is, what is our value? What are our values? And I think that's the right question that you ask. It certainly has caused us to step back and ask us, you know, what are the values that are timeless? What are the values that are core to our mission? Among them is a commitment to the broad protection of human rights. It's an easy thing to say. It's actually a complicated thing to do. I think it starts with a commitment to do no harm, that we manage our own business in a way that is sensitive to and protective of other people's human rights. But it ultimately extends to questions like, can we use technology to protect human rights? Can we use our voice with technology to protect human rights? And we do bring all of that together in what we hope is a robust way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I want to come back to DACA for a second, but we were talking about a moment ago, you saw the letter that Larry Fink wrote to CEOs. So Larry Fink, you know, runs BlackRock, which is, you know, the biggest asset manager in the world. And what he was really calling on is companies like yours to, in a sense, be social activists or to be leaders on social issues around the globe. And he was saying that, in a sense, is the recipe for long-term sustained outperformance in the world in which we operate today. Can you talk a little bit about that for a second?
I think it's a fascinating thought and question, and one that we largely agree with. I think you have to first start with the why. Why should companies do this? Or more precisely, why are people asking companies to do this? And there's a few data points that all sort of are pushing us forward, if you will. The first is his. He says companies that are thinking about something bigger than themselves and are thinking about their broad societal mission and contribution are likely to create more value for customers and shareholders over the long term.
Right.
So that's the first point. I think coming from the other end is really employees. Employees today are asking their employers to take on issues that matter to them, to speak out, and especially to address these issues when they relate to their needs. And they have high expectations. I think that there's a third dimension that helps explain this, and it's captured in things like the annual Edelman Trust Barometer. Unfortunately, broadly speaking, trust in the media has gone down, trust in governments has gone down, trust in companies is making a bit of a rebound.
Right.
And what I found most interesting this year is that employees have greater trust in their employer than almost any other institution. Of course, with that trust comes a high responsibility and even high expectations. So we need to address all of these things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We collect a lot of data, and our thesis at Ethisphere is that companies that are better citizens outperform over the long term. But what's underneath that next is they attract and retain the best employees.
You raised an incredibly important point about employees. In our business, and indeed in so many businesses today, you are nothing without attracting and retaining great employees. So when you think about trust, for example, you have to retain the trust of so many different groups of stakeholders, but I actually think you have to start by retaining the trust of your employees. And I think that's a healthy thing because employees these days have such high expectations that if you do well in sustaining their trust, especially with a large organization and a large number of employees, a global workforce, if you will, you're probably going to be pretty well positioned to retain other people's trust too.
Right. Well, if I think about your pretty wide remit, to me, I think about, can you really create a culture where it's a challenger culture, where it's a culture of innovation, where people aren't afraid to say, not only we can make this product better, but I see something I don't like here. Right? So how do you do that? And that is to engender the trust of your employees. So, and then the next step of that is how do you be a really good corporate citizen in the communities in which you operate around the globe? And so to me, it's really fascinating that some of the things that you're really talking about. And, to that end, I'll come back a little bit about DACA. You were really, so it's a humanitarian issue. It's an economic issue. Talk a little bit more about that.
We found our voice quickly on DACA.
You did.
And there were a few of us who talked the weekend where we saw that the White House decision was looming, and we decided that we would put a stake in the ground. We felt it was a business imperative for the company because we have 45 employees who are registered under DACA, and we wanted them to know that we had their back. We used pretty strong language in saying that
the full weight of my.
We would put the weight of the company behind them. We would ensure they had their own legal representation, and we would go to court and stand by their side. I also think it's a humanitarian imperative. The numbers are large, 800,000 or so.
Right.
But I think it's more than that. And as somebody who's worked on a lot of immigration issues over the years, there's an aspect about DACA that is fairly unique. So many of these people have never lived in their memory anywhere outside the United States.
Right.
So to deport them is not to deport them to their home. It is to deport them away from their home. And in truth, you have to go back to sort of the World War II era in some respects, or in some other countries around the world, to find similar situations where countries have forced out of their own borders the people who have grown up there. And anytime you're facing that kind of issue, I think one does need to address it with more urgency, even than others.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So if you think of some of the things, I think you guys have won awards for diversity. I know certainly in the legal profession, you guys have really encouraged your law firms and kind of measured them and rewarded the ones that do the best job. And then if you think about being a good corporate citizen or being a good citizen in your community, which is really what CSR is, and the impact, be it environmental or be it however in your community. We do this program every year that Microsoft typically is pretty involved in. It calls it Global Ethics Summit.
Right.
And the audience are multinational corporations. So how is all of these things connected into really a high-performing company? So diversity, inclusion, CSR, taking a stand on things that are important. Like, what's the secret sauce here for companies?
Well, one of the reasons that we are so enthusiastic about the work that Ethisphere does is, in my opinion, you help companies find their voice. And I think finding your voice really requires two things. One is you have to know the values for which you stand, and the other is you have to have some courage. And you do both of those. You help us all think about the values that are important to us. I think that you remind us that there are values that transcend individual companies or even the private sector as a whole. But the other thing that I have found so interesting in talking with people who do CSR work at other companies is oftentimes it's the first step that's the hardest. They have to persuade the leaders of the company or others to have the courage to speak out. And I have always found myself that it's not a bad thing to have somebody else you can point to as a model or as an example. I think Ethisphere provides some of that. It's what we've tried to do, and it's what I've tried to do as we've had more years of experience doing this. When I think back to the first time we took a position on immigration, that was not an easy decision necessarily to make as a company or to overcome internal debate. But you find your voice and, frankly, you see how it goes. And if it goes well, then you're prepared to take the next step. But we live at a time where I do think companies need to find their voice and summon their courage. And the more that we can do to help others do that, I think the better off we all are.
Do you believe, or does Microsoft, the company, believe, and it's a little bit of a softball question because you've shown with your actions, but does this lead to greater business success? Because you are a publicly traded company, and by the way, I don't know if you saw it today, my old company, Thomson Reuters, I worked there 20 some odd years, you were rated the #1 technology company in the world today by Thomson Reuters. So, but is all of this linked to business success?
I believe that a strong ethical commitment and even a use of a corporate voice in an appropriate way is linked to business success. It's certainly linked in our business. One of the reasons it's linked in our business is with the advent of cloud computing, with the onset of artificial intelligence, people are entrusting us, literally they are entrusting us oftentimes with their most precious data. It is being stored in our data centers. They have to trust us or we will not be successful. We won't continue to obtain their business. So it really calls on us to think about how to internalize that in a broad array of ways. But as we do that, as we speak out, as we take the steps that hopefully sustain people's trust, I think it does help us because then people say, yes, I feel comfortable relying on this company for technology that is so important to me or to my business.
So Microsoft is middle-aged. You're 50. A little bit older than 50?
No, we're under 50. I want you to know we're only about 43. 50 is very distant.
Okay. But what characteristics would you say if you're going to be here for the next 43, 50, 100, what characteristics would you say that a company would have to have? And by the way, one of the great things I personally believe is you're hearing really smart, influential people talk about long-termism all the time, right? So what characteristics should a company have as a foundation to be there for the next 43, 50 years and so on?
I think right now at Microsoft, we're focused fundamentally on two things, and I think that they serve us well, and they hopefully will continue to serve us well. The first is what Satya Nadella, our CEO, has talked about as a growth mindset. This comes from Carol Dweck and Stanford and some great research and thinking in the social sciences. But the basic thesis is that we all benefit from constantly challenging ourselves, recognizing that most of our abilities are not fixed. We have more we can learn every day. It's okay to try and fail and learn and grow and then reward that constant learning. Now, the key, I think, especially when you think about the kinds of issues that Ethisphere deals with, is to combine a growth mindset with a clear understanding that there are some risks that you should not take. There are some values that are so steadfast that you must never sacrifice them. So as we like to say inside Microsoft, there are lots of risks that are inherent in being in business or crossing the street as an individual, but don't take integrity risk. Don't put your integrity at risk. Don't do it as an individual. Don't do it for your team or your department or your company. And then you need to work with people. One of the things that David Howard has been really championing here in Microsoft is this sense that integrity is both a set of values, but it's a skill. It's a skill that we need to invest in helping people learn, because that too actually often requires the ability to spot an issue, to have judgment in how to think about it, and the courage to know when to raise your voice inside a company and say, this would be a problem if we did it, we better think again.
Right, right. So what advice can you, and it's been fascinating to me to watch the voice of major American corporations with you as absolutely one of the, if not the leader, one of the top leaders in a 24/7, 365 news cycle, right? And one of the things that Ethisphere believes very strongly is we can have greater impact by the carrot versus the stick. You know, there's lots of folks that want to say nasty things about companies. We believe we can encourage great people striving for overperformance in some of the areas that we talked about through the carrot. And also, it doesn't hurt that the companies like Microsoft that we've ranked as the world's most ethical, in the 11 years we've done it, they've outperformed every financial metric. So that doesn't hurt either. But how do you sort of stay true to that in a 24/7, 365 news cycle?
Well, it's such an interesting question, and I think it's of such fundamental importance in the world today to be able to move quickly and make decisions and then communicate. And, at one level, it's easier if you know what you stand for, if you know your values. But I do think it requires a couple of other things as well. It does require this sense of courage that we've been talking about. I think it actually requires a sense of, or dose of humility, because you have to recognize, especially when you're moving fast, you're not going to get everything right.
Right.
You're going to get some arrows shot back at you. That's okay. We're all going to continue to learn and grow, and perfection isn't for this time and place. But I think the third thing it really requires, and in some ways this is the part that companies may not always think through, is you need to have clear processes and decision-making set up so it can move fast. So that, if it is literally as it was the Sunday afternoon of Labor Day weekend, and you had been on the phone with the White House trying to dissuade them from taking this step on DACA and recognizing that we were not going to be successful. All right, we then knew we had 24 or 36 hours to decide what we wanted to say, to write it up in a blog, to get it out there. You have to move fast, and you don't move fast unless you put the groundwork in place beforehand.
Right. No, it was great to watch. So I guess I would say, Brad, to you and the team at Microsoft and the work you guys do around the world, we did a program with you in Japan. You guys have been super engaged with, the community of companies in Ethisphere. Thank you. And we look forward to, whether it's 43 or 50 years, or however many it is, we look forward to, continuing to sort of raise the bar, continuing to have that growth mindset on character and behavior. And so, again, from us, thank you.
Well, thank you, because you are raising the bar. You're providing perspective and judgment and resources and tools that all of us benefit from. And I think while we're excited about the things we're doing today, the only thing that really will keep us at the forefront for any kind of time is a sense of humility, a recognition that the border keeps changing in terms of what we have to accomplish. There's a new frontier, if you will, and you're going to help us identify where we need to go. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.